Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Lowdown. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my good friend Jonathon O'Neill, who's taken an alternative stance on a beautiful game with his new app, Head Coach. John, welcome to the show.
Cheers, Connor, mate. Thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming.
Long time coming, plenty of Zooms to get here, but glad we both had the time in our busy schedules to schedule this chat. But anyways, Johnny, I'm sure we both know each other's career journeys inside out by now. But just for everybody listening, could you elaborate a bit more on your own unique footballing journey to date?
Yeah, how long have I got? Where do you want me to start?
I think there's a limit on the Zoom call, so hopefully no more than a few hours.
No worries. Well, you know me, I'm from Belfast. I'm from the same island as yourself, albeit one island, there are much different cultures on them. So I was brought up in North Belfast, which is a bit of a football hotbed. So I was a Cliftonville fan, which is the oldest club in Ireland, oldest stadium in Ireland too. So I've been following them from I was about 6 years of age. That's probably where my passion started for football, with my dad bringing me to the games. And then on top of that, I think around the same time you would have had Arsene Wenger signed for Arsenal as the manager. So I suppose my teams have always been red, and it's all fused together from there. So that's where my passion for football came from. Started coaching when I was about 20, went back to school, did my BTECs, HNDs, grads, postgrads, all that kind of stuff. I did my postgrad in coaching. While I was doing that, I was working for a football club called St Mary's, which is a grassroots club in Belfast. They're one of the biggest in Ireland. So I worked there for about 7 years. I moved from there once I'd done my B license and went to a club called Knockbreda, where I spent a short period as an under-20s coach. Just around that time, about 6 months in, before I missed my Northern Ireland Cup final with my team, I ended up signing for Vancouver Whitecaps. Went there to work as a provincial academy centre head coach in partnership with Canada Soccer, where we ran their high performance program from U15 to under 18. Spent about a year and a half there. Ended up going with Burnley, their foundation, to be head coach of a Chinese project they had over there. It was their biggest project they had at the time. And unfortunately, with COVID, everything went to dust pretty early, released from the contract. And then since then, I've been a bit of a football nomad. So yeah, that's pretty much my journey in football now. It's been a lot of leaps and bounds and forward steps and backward steps, but it's certainly been a drama, to say the least.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Just fascinating the level of detail and insight there into your own unique journey, Johnny. I suppose Arsenal and Cliftonville being one unique mixture, but another unique mixture, would be the role of emotional intelligence within football. And that's what I know you're doing currently at this moment with your new app, Head Coach. I mean, could you just describe succinctly for us all listening? I mean, what exactly is EI and how does it affect performance on the field?
Funny thing, mate, because the thing about emotional intelligence is it's interpreted many ways. There's multiple models for it. There's been a lot of research put into it the past 20 years, but to put it maybe very simply, emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize your emotions, how they impact you, how they impact your performance, whatever that may be, whether it's at home, in the workplace, coaching, and how it affects others around you. And then how you can potentially recognize other people's emotions and how can we manage that relationship. And it's funny because they say that, but there's been a lot of interest in research recently. One of the research things I looked at was a girl called Lisa Feldman Barrett, where she's a neuroscientist, and she says that humans more or less overestimate their ability to understand and recognize emotions in other people. So I suppose for the sake of our argument, for our conversation, we'll speak about understanding your own emotions, how it impacts your performance. And if you want to go on to a bit of a rabbit hole with the other side, then we could do that too. So yeah, that's the way I would look at it.
Very interesting. And I suppose with the latest research that's coming out on EI, John, I mean, would you take from that we ourselves as coaches need to become more emotionally intelligent? Or would you argue for the fact that there should be an individual separate coach, like much akin to what we're seeing now in football with set pieces coach, mental coaching and whatnot? I mean, should there be separate emotionally intelligent coaches for the players?
I mean, when we speak about mental and we spoke about emotional intelligence and psychological and all that, I'm all for a multidisciplinary team. I still think that the coach has to embody and know thing or two about each of these things and also put it into practice. So there's certainly something to that. The reason that I like the emotional intelligence model is because there's a million psychological models out there, but for me as a coach, it kind of covers everything, because the model that I use, it instills confidence and adaptability and empathy if you're a coach, and competitive drive if you're a player. So yeah, for me, I think that it's key for a coach to have emotional intelligence, and if he doesn't, he's going to have someone really close to him who's able to understand him and convey his message. Because if you think about intelligence itself, it's probably the ability to recognize patterns, and it's probably linked to your football understanding and competency. But you can be the smartest coach in the world and have the deepest understanding of the game, but if you don't connect with your player, you're never going to impact them. So if you don't have the ability to create a relationship, then you're never going to get it across to the player. So I think there's something about football ability, football competency in relation to understanding tactics, game insight, execution, periodization, all that kind of stuff. But also, how do you bring it across? And not just in your session design, how do you speak to people? How do you manage people? How do you manage yourself?
Like, speaking about EI in isolation, it's completely logical, right? How we react as humans to each other and whatnot, how we speak to others, how we see ourselves in front of others. But when we look at EI within football, it sends a shiver down many a spine. And I suppose you yourself taking the football coach route in your journey to date and doing the EI stuff now on the side, Jony, there must be some, formative experiences you've had in your youth, I suppose, growing up, or in your earlier coaching days, that has, I suppose, focused your energy or allowed you to channel your energy, looking more at the EI side. Would I be correct in saying?
Yeah, 100%, mate. There's certainly a cultural element to it. It's funny because we spoke about this before, and these things are really common sense. And I could swear when I was in China and I was trying to translate emotional intelligence into Chinese, the direct translation was common sense, something along those lines. But as we spoke about before, like, common sense isn't too common. And when you add all the variables into life and how difficult it might be for someone to manage themselves, especially if you spend most of your life like not conscious of what you're doing, particularly if you haven't developed those kind of skills and your self-awareness, then it's going to have a big impact. And whether you know it or not, it's going to happen. It's probably much more dangerous, if that's the word, for you to not know than to know,
Football, it's still a place where, how is common sense or EI evaluated on the coaching course? Last time I checked, there's no certificates handed out for either.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the way I look at it, one of the most important parts of emotional intelligence is probably how you project yourself and how you speak to people. But one thing that I was always lucky with my coach educators when I was going through my licenses, or right up to A licenses, you're projecting your coaching voice. So how you project yourself is going to rub off on others, and that's a big part of it. And just to go back to what you were saying about the cultural piece, it's funny because I think it was when I was doing my postgraduate in England in around 2015-16, I was speaking to another guy from Belfast called Paul McVeigh. Paul played for Tottenham Hotspur, for Norwich. He was an academy performance psychologist for Crystal Palace. And on the phone one day to him, he asked me the question. He's from Belfast, and so obviously there's certainly something to the culture. He asked me, did I know what emotional intelligence was? To which I said no. And then there was another funny piece where I was literally just about to step into the module on it in my university course. So it all went from there, and it really opened a new rabbit hole. And I would really say that, like we've spoke about before, we probably have it implicitly because some of these skills are linked to your personality and the way you're brought up. So like good manners and how you speak to people is kind of basic, right? But yeah, having spoke to Paul and done a lot of research from them, and then practiced it not just on my players but myself, I've really seen the value in relation to expanding your potential, not just as a coach but off the pitch too, because surely it all goes together if you're a coach.
Yeah, and I suppose, like, to go down another rabbit hole, it'd be rude of us not to, now that you mentioned, you've coached in Ireland, the UK, Canada and China, 3 or 4 very, very different cultures right there off the bat. I mean, there would have been some, I suppose, facets of the coaching practices in each of those countries that you would have absorbed, others that you would have discarded. But I suppose if you're going to take us through, I mean, what were the key differences linked, I suppose, to how people treated each other, how they delivered sessions, and how EI was kind of incorporated into session design and all of the above?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of incorporating it into your sessions, it's always going to come from you and who you are and what your values are and what you believe, and that's going to transcend onto the pitch into your players. I think from when you're coming from Ireland, first thing you have to think about is that coaches aren't paid to coach. So you got people who are probably great coaches and could really go far with it, but there's no money involved. So they probably come after work, after working and have wife and kids, and then they're throwing a session together. One thing you notice about kids back home is they always have a good rapport with their coach. So surely that's the basis for any of it, whether they have the platform to then go and maximize the potential of themselves as a coach, improve the players' football ability, and then themselves is another story. So there's certainly something about that when it comes to Ireland. In Canada, the difference in Canada is everyone has a platform to excel because they get paid full time for their job. So I could swear that most Irish league managers working at the top level in Ireland wouldn't get paid as much as an academy coach in Canada, who isn't at a professional academy because it's pay to play. So everyone has a platform to fulfill their potential. We have, I mean, when I worked for Whitecaps and you see their facilities at UBC, I think it was like something like $30-40 million to build, and having been at a couple of MLS facilities like the Swope Park in Kansas City, and even going to Barnfield with Burnley, like they have as good as facilities as any Premier League club, and the systems and the setup they have is equal to a Category 1 because they have a great menu there and they can put it all together because they have the money. So there's certainly something to that. And then I would say that there's a different kind of resilience with a Canadian player due to that. You know, it's as opposed to a platform they've had is different. Session design is very interesting in Canada, as you know from listening to John Herdman. He's done a great job over there in terms of their coach education department. So I certainly took a lot of stuff from there. And in terms of tactical understanding and game analysis, I learned a lot from some top coaches in Canada, probably more than I've learned anywhere else. In the UK, probably similar to Ireland, but then there's a feel of things different. This is where football's from, and there's the home of it. I think sometimes coaches can get a little bit lazy though, because they think I'm from here, so I know everything about football. Haven't been to Canada and met some coaches there better than I've seen elsewhere in the world. That's certainly not true. So that's a shout out to the Canadian coaches more than anything and their coach education system. I do know that they speak about transformational coaching and leadership, which would be tightly aligned to emotional intelligence. So there's certainly something to that in Canada. When it comes to China, coaches are very, very different. And I know you're going to speak about a quote later from Wenger, but they're obsessed with isolated technique because their culture is very pointing the finger, do what I say. There's a lot of that. But the thing is, from what I've seen, the coaches were still loved by the players and the players still loved their coach. So it's just interesting how the cultural part might change what you might frame EI as in that place.
It's huge, and it's certainly, football has certainly come on leaps and bounds in the last few decades, I suppose, when it comes to topics such as this. Recently, Simon Cooper obviously has penned a fantastic book on the inside of Barcelona, and in the audiobook I'm listening to at the moment, for some reason, Ruud Gullit was brought up. But anyhow, Ruud Gullit was asked by Simon Cooper about the differences between players in Holland, Italy, and England, the three nations where he played as a player. And he says in Holland, everybody loves to think, and all the players think they know better than the manager. In Italy, all the players love to think, but they always respect the manager. And then Cooper noticed Gullit said nothing about England, and he asked him so, and he said, "Look, England's not worth asking about. All the players just go around laughing in the dressing room." Which was a fascinating kind of comparison. But just to revert back, I mean, one thing that you mentioned earlier on was about providing pathways for players, which I'm particularly intrigued to kind of hone in on. One book we've gone back and forth with on numerous Zoom calls recently has been Transcendence by Scott Barry Kaufman, and you put me in touch with his podcast, which is fantastic, by the way, psychology podcast, where he kind of debunks the original Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, this latest research, which has come out from Kaufman on transcendentness, I mean, could you just explain a little bit about that, Jony, and how that you think could impact the future player and coach?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can probably relate it back to my own coaching journey as well. Coming from Belfast with no full-time football, not a lot of jobs. Like my dream is always to be to make a career for myself in football and fulfill my potential, whatever that may be. So the way I figured it out was you go work for an MLS club, then you go maybe work for a Premier League club, and then you figure it out from there. So like when I signed for Whitecaps, it was a great job, great people, great platform, good money, everything was perfect. Everything I had wanted. But then you get there and you're sitting, you're reflecting, you're going, well, is this it? Is this what I wanted and I was chasing and was struggling for and fighting for? And then you probably confuse that with your meaning in life, right? Your purpose or what you're here for. But the more I look back, that was probably just a goal and a signpost as a measure of that I had achieved or I had got somewhere. Then I realized that wasn't enough. That wasn't everything. And then you start to reflect on what other aspects of your life have you sacrificed to get here, and how does that all tie in? So I think since then I've been in deep thought about what it means to self-actualize itself, and it's what is fulfilling your potential. And that's true for a player as well as a coach, because what great is it to win the European Cup if you have no wife, or you're lonely, or you have no friends, or you're unhealthy, or like, are these things you should sacrifice for something like that? And obviously it depends on your values, right? But for me, the way I look at it is you can have your cake and eat it too. And what I refer to is probably, if you think about a player who's just retired and he has lost his meaning in life because everything was tied around his identity of I'm a footballer, that's me, it's who I am. And then when that stops, well, who are they? And we all know the stats about alcohol and drugs and money and all the issues that footballers have. So there's something about having a deeper intention related to your identity. You know, not just a coach, you're also a friend, a person who's part of a group, i.e. humanity. We're also an individual. So how do all these things tie together? What is my ideal life, I suppose? Like, how would I wake up every day and want to spend it if it was my last? And how do I tie my intention to my long-term goals? Something around that as well. We know that Jordan Peterson always says that you can't have positive emotion if you don't have a long-term goal or an intention. So there's certainly something around the identity of it, who you are, who you want to be, how you mark off signposts in relation to that, and if it's okay if you don't make them, because that's going to happen, right? So I suppose it's about being okay with who you are, while also having one eye on who you want to be or what you want to do.
Wise words, Johnny. But like, what I come back to the whole time is a podcast I've shared with Daniel Goldman, psychology podcast, or I think vice versa, you shared it with me. Goldman had a great quote. He was like, IQ gets you into the job, EQ determines your performance within it. And for me, like, look, we've, unbeknownst to people listening to this podcast, we've had a lot of Zooms now going back and forth recently about session design. And, we see the fallacy of language. Yourself and me were trying to explain very similar concepts, but using completely different terminology. So for me, is sense making and self-actualization like two sides of the same coin? Maybe there's one level greater than language. There has to be, which is intuition. So when it comes back to EI, at the end of the day, it's all about developing, that trust within your players. If you don't have that trust within your players, how can you begin to describe these concepts even within yourself?
Great question, mate. When you say that, is there a difference between them? There's one lie in front of the other. What I think about when you say what is sense making, is sense making how you perceive the world in relation to the information that you have, i.e. what you've read, what you've understood, what you've experienced. And the other side then is how you manage and regulate that in relation to how you see it. I think that's the way we look at it. It probably is two sides of the same coin.
It's interesting because, like, you hear the likes of Thomas Tuchel speaking about Chelsea last season, how he revitalized that squad when he came in the doors last January. And he spoke about, it's the formation, it's the principles, their lived experiences. We lived them day by day. They enact these scenarios, like the players when Azpilicueta is playing right centre back, or Jorginho with his back to goal or on the side turn receiving the ball in midfield. They've lived out that situation hundreds, if not thousands of times before, which you would expect which would be prudent of a top level coach like Tuchel. But like, zooming back out now that we know what EI exactly is, how can we actually improve it on the field? I mean, what would be some of the techniques, or I suppose practices, the best in class like a Tuchel or Klopp would use to raise emotional intelligence within their players?
I think it goes back to what you said about language and the language that we use, because language regulates other people as well. The language that you use is regulating other people, affects how they feel. And how you feel regulates, impacts, the language that you use. So like for Tuchel to come in a short period of time and win a European Cup, obviously there's a million variables and luck, et cetera, but he didn't have a million years to fit his game model in. And a game model for a level of coach like that will probably take a year, maybe two, to implement. If you look at Nagelsmann now, the Bayern team compared to his team the year before, like the complexity isn't there, but the basic principles are there. Maybe there's something to do with, and I'm just speculating, the way Frank Lampard, an ex-professional player, who thinks because he's played, he knows everything or knows how to talk to people, or this is how it was done. Maybe there's a bit of a different way than someone like Tuchel, who's an experienced coach who's had to manage himself and top level players from a hierarchical position. I suppose even if you would look at it like that, maybe he doesn't. Maybe that was Frank Lampard's issue. So yeah, there's certainly something along those lines to it.
Interesting, because there's obviously been those before Tuchel as well. Tuchel hasn't just done this overnight. He's learned from the greats. He's had case studies there before him. And I suppose one of the OGs in this respect was who you mentioned earlier on, Arsene Wenger, who's had a great quote that I've been sitting upon for a few years now, where he speaks about football being the only sport where you first focus on execution before decision making, which is quite a damning indictment of many coaching curriculums, but just goes to show, like, it is the norm, whether we like it or not.
It is the norm. And even the places where you see the education has been given, it goes against what people believe and what people think to be true, and even what they identify with, so they struggle to do it. So yeah, I don't know if it's an issue, and we could probably debate all day, isolated technique, blah blah, versus, but I don't even think that's a debate. It's just, I mean, Arsenal, there's probably no better man, all the research that he's done with Jared Jordet and everybody else. He's been on to that for a long time. But I mean, if we're going to decide something and then execute it, we have to take in variables first before we decide what to do. So, I mean, surely the best thing to do is to take in as many variables as possible, or the most important variables, which would be obviously your perception or your vision, what you see, and then obviously you make a decision from that, and then you execute it. So yeah, it certainly is back to front. And it was a big issue when I was in China, trying to explain it to their coaches who are obsessed with technique. And then I gave them the Raymond Verheyen quote, which like, what's your execution in football is technique is not execution of a technique. It is in gymnastics, but in football, it's an execution of a decision. And then the decision is something that's taken in relation to the information you've taken in. So yeah, I mean, that's something we'll fight with forever. Luckily for me and you, we don't have that issue. So yeah, we have our own environments whereby we can implement what we see it.
It's really interesting, because like the more and more you learn about EI, the more and more you speak about EI with as knowledgeable people that such as yourself, Johnny, you go down, rabbit hole upon rabbit hole. And it's like, once you think you're not a master of a subject, but once you think your knowledge is sufficient in an area, the latest research comes around and quashes it. Which, kind of leads to my next point in question. I mean, you talk about your lived experience there in China, saying, although, there was very much a hierarchical kind of coaching position there, where basically the coaches were dictating down to the kids, as to, I'm the coach, when you're teaching technique in isolation. All this emotional intelligence stuff sounds, very tiresome. Treating each player as their own separate identity, focusing on how they see the game, focus on how they learn. I mean, can you see why coaches, perhaps in traditional setups, are put off by the topic?
I mean, you can see why anyone's put off by anything, because one of the biggest parts of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, and that means looking at yourself and how you behave and how it impacts others. And people don't like to do that. It's the worst thing ever, short term, to be very critical of how you are. So there's certainly something to resistance. I think it just in any sports psychology domain, there's always that, because they don't see it as something tangible, when they see it as buzzwords and woohoo stuff. But I mean, if you think about it, like we were speaking about, if players' brains are the most important thing, i.e. the information they take in, how they perceive it, etc., then surely them having a regulated brain state is key to their success as a player, and then to performance, and also learning and improving ability. So surely as a coach, if your language and how you manifest as a coach impacts them, surely that you would want to do that too. So I just think it's about giving people tangible tips and guidelines to actually improve it, because people separate psychology from football. But to me, like, the best coaches are psychologists, and the best psychologists are probably coaches, because if you think about coaching as a pure science or art, it's essentially about people fulfilling potential, whether it's football or whether it's something else. And even if it is football, outside that too, looking at the player first, or the person, sorry, which goes back to the whole transcendence, self-actualization piece.
It's interesting though, because like where I think the problem lies is that we misinterpret football a lot of the time. Obviously, one game in 90 minutes is a finite game. It is zero sum. There's a winner and there's a loser and there's a defined time period. That one game of football within the course of a season, within the course of 2 years, is within an infinite series of games. So, like for me, when I look at yourself, Jony, just having spoken to you, but before I know for a fact, I mean, one of the reasons you set up the app was, of course, you want to develop a niche in a market, you want to build a brand and whatnot. But I know success for you would be if you had people out there that would take inspiration from that and compete with you. Because overall, that's going to raise the awareness of emotional intelligence within football, right? And the more people you have engaging with EI within football, the better it is for you and any other competition. So, I mean, it's just, what do you have to say about that, just in terms of, football being that zero-sum game that we're brought up? Because even like, you can't say that nowadays. As a player, perhaps, you have a 15, 20-year career at best when you're a professional. But that coach, you've been coaching for the past 10, 11 years. And I hope, and I know you do, you have hopes and aspirations to coach for the next, 20 or 30 plus. So for you, football is very much an infinite game.
It doesn't stop, mate. There's no finish line. There's no end. The game is only a piece of a puzzle, right? So I'm always thinking about, how do I maximize my potential? How do I make sure I'm in the best shape mentally, physically, for the players, so that I can, when I'm learning and improving as well as a coach, that I can give it to them. So I think it all goes together. And I think that's where I'm lucky, because it's tied to my life intentions, what I want to do with life. If I want to be the best coach, then I got to be a better person. If I want to be a better person, then I better get a good enough sleep. I better reflect, better be grateful every morning when I wake up. So then when I go and speak to people, I'm not bringing them down. We've all had it. We've all been in environments where coaches, like, emotion is contagious. Bad mood, bad energy is contagious. So if you're the architect of that, you should be very, very careful and intentional, particularly when you're working with children and you can impact them for their lives. And one of the most satisfying things for me about coaching is that I have contact with players that from I started coaching till the last team that I had. I have an emotional connection with them because I care about them. I want them to get better. And yeah, that's for me, it all goes together. So there is no finish line when it comes to football. I just hope when I do finish, when I'm 80 or 90, if that's how long it takes, that I can look back and say that was the same case for the next couple of decades.
Just goes back to what you said earlier on, Jony, about signposting, the type of person you want to be. It's huge, just the small details, they all add up. But I suppose, like we've spoken upon on this podcast and dissected, some of the best and worst case examples you've come across in practice. But at the very top of the game right now, I suppose, who are the best emotionally intelligent coaches that you see out there at the moment?
Jurgen Klopp, in terms of him being able to engage the emotions from players. Sometimes people think about emotion being absent or something like kind of Zen guru stuff, which it can be sometimes, but there's certainly something about being able to manage people to the point where they're going to run through a brick wall for you. And that comes from passion and relationships. And that's certainly tied to his emotion. I think in terms of using an emotional intelligence framework in particular, you're probably talking Graham Potter from Brighton. I know that he did a university degree with some kind of particular in emotional intelligence. I know that he did have a very successful career in Scandinavia with it. And I am sure that he has taken that to Brighton, and it's probably like a values driven approach with principles. And I do know that their performance and well-being department has merged, which is something that I look at my own like definition of performance as. You can't define it as separately from well-being. So yeah, and even having spoke to his assistant on my A license, Bruno, who played for him as a right back the year before, like he was a top guy. There was no one more friendly on the course. You see a lot of people who give it big time, and it's probably the I'm okay, you're not okay frame. There was no ego from him. There was no anything other than help, and you could feel the passion and the warm, positive energy from him. So I'm sure that that's something that Graham Potter has envisaged and then put into practice. And Brighton, and as you see, they're doing pretty well now. I don't know about their XG and their goals against, but they're certainly doing well right now. I don't know what standard deviation I'll have to say about it in the next 10.
I think the XG is eventually caught up.
Yeah, that could be it.
Years, they didn't have too much luck.
It happens, it eventually has to come around, doesn't it?
Exactly. It just goes to say it all. Like, I mean, as we've said plenty of times now, there's no separation between who you are on the pitch and who you are off. And, you know, if you can get away with it being a player, so be it. You know, as you elaborated upon there with Bruno, that wasn't to be the case. But as a coach, I don't think there's any room to be hiding when it's very much a merger of your personal and professional life. And you're spending the bones of 12, 14 hours a day planning sessions, delivering sessions, doing a feedback analysis and whatnot. So, like, that moves me into my next question. A man as busy as yourself, you know, when it comes to coaching, you've taken a big plunge now to launch your own app, the Head Coach app, which I'm pretty sure will be very successful, Jony. But I mean, what was the initial idea behind the app? And can you tell us a bit more about the functionality of it?
Yeah, 100%, mate. It's probably an amalgamation of a lot of things. I wrote a paper in about 2016 in university about the modern player and what it's going to take to get to the top level, maybe when you're around 17, 18 at the top academy. Obviously, game intelligence is a massive piece of it. But the other part that we looked at was physical competency. You don't need to be a freak. You need to be competent physically, because there's many cases, like I even look at Paul McVeigh or like even the likes of Lionel Messi, that they're as quick as someone in the Irish league. The difference is how they perceive and execute and decide, of course. But I thought there was something missing from looking at it just from an emotional standpoint or like an intelligence standpoint. I wanted to look at behavior as well. So I've been playing around with behavioral models, and I really like habit models and habit tracking. So when I was in China, I was thinking of a way to impact the players off the pitch and on the pitch as players and as individuals. And obviously wanted to tap back to their long-term goals and who they are, because you're not just going to build habits for no reason. So basically, the way the app works is you'll have a chief definite aim, and it's just kind of like a long-term goal or a dream or an intention. And when you go into the app, you'll type it in. You'll have a little board, like a little bit of a profile where you'll see your quote. And this is the thing that you're looking to work towards long-term. And how we go about reaching those goals, obviously, is your habits every day, because how you live, the little habits that you have every day is going to be what you spend most of your life doing, right? How you go to sleep, how you wake up, what you do in the mornings, what you do in the evenings, etc. So I thought a good way to implement an emotional intelligence framework to the players was to be as one of the habits to deliver mental skills such as confidence, resilience, flexibility, those kind of things. So the way I worked it is we have a habit tracker that's built into the app, and it's based off Maslow's hierarchy of needs, very loosely, of course, because as we've said before, Maslow hated the pyramid. So basically it's about monitoring and tracking your basic habits, such as your sleep, optimal nutrition, having enough water. All these things are key, even when you're thinking about emotional intelligence. Like, to have good sleep is probably more important than anything else, because you wake up in a bad mood and with not a lot of sleep, and that's not too great. So on top of the basic habits, you have a choice to build and track other habits, with the one non-negotiable one being a well-being journal. So you can reflect, develop that self-awareness of how you are acting, how you're behaving, how you're feeling, and how it affects you and others around you. And then the other one being the emotional intelligence strategies. So if you train Monday and Wednesday, you'll get a notification on those days with a strategy. So let's say within the periodization, confidence is the one. So it might say display positive body language at all times on the pitch today, something along those lines. And then there's also like a well-being tracker. And obviously well-being is very ambiguous. It's very hard to define and even measure and monitor well-being. But what we believe is that people should take control of their own well-being and their own performance and their own personal development. So it's just a way for you to measure and monitor your well-being, as well as build and track good habits, and then build that emotional intelligence, those mental skills required for life and for the pitch.
There you go, everyone. First, we've had the theory from Jony, now we've had the practice of how it works. Sounds absolutely fascinating, to be honest. Can't wait to get my hands on it once it's out there in the App Store now, John. But I mean, I know there's, between us anyways, there's good news in the horizon for yourself. But I suppose you know where I'm going with my next question. I mean, what does the future hold for yourself in a coaching capacity?
Do you want my dream or my long-term goals or my short-term goals? Because I know we spoke a lot recently about having a plan. Yeah, well, I mean, look, I had a 10-year plan up until last year. It's funny because some of those signposts are cool because you can obviously want to work at a top level, fulfill your potential, whatever that means. But then what are the tangible goals and signposts to get you there? So I have one more assessment for my A license. What I would love to do after would be get on to my pro license. But to do that, I should be working in a particular environment. So I suppose it would be about being in an environment like that. Short term, I'm not too sure, not too worried, because what I know from the past couple of years, having plans, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, as Mike Tyson said. So even before COVID happened, the reason I had left Canada was because I had visa issues. So I jumped over to China with Burnley, thought that was sorted. And then COVID happens. So luckily I was prepared for that 6 months in advance from the setback I had before that. So right now I'm just waiting for an opportunity where I can work in a good environment with good people, where I'll be challenged and stretched. So I'm hoping that something comes up soon. But before that, we have the app launching before Christmas. I think we're 2 weeks away, 3 weeks from the beta stage. We'll do a 6-week test with a club, a professional academy. And then after that, we'll launch it. And hopefully, I know coaches will like it. And we just hope the players do too, because it was built by a coach, for coaches and for players. So the coaches who maybe are a bit hesitant or don't have the time to spend developing those skills or developing the structures without interfering in their practice, the kids can have this little app they track and monitor and themselves. And yeah, I'm hoping that pays off for me in the next foreseeable future.
And you know, someone like yourself, Jony, obviously you've lived the dream coaching in so many good professional environments. I mean, you've developed a side project there, a side hustle now that's going to become, you know, so much about what you are going to do in terms of being a coach within the next 5 to 10 years. And with everything combined, I mean, like cultivating that niche. I mean, what advice would you have for others that would be aspiring to go down the footballing route, perhaps cultivate that little niche for themselves, such as yourself?
Number one would be believe in yourself, no matter what it is you want to do, no matter how crazy you think it might be, because there will always be people who try and put you down, or whatever you want to call it. So always believe in yourself, but then commit to whatever it is you want to do, and then hold yourself accountable to the commitment, because anyone can believe anything, but it may not be true, and you might not be working towards it. But then a monkey can also work hard. So make sure you believe something, there's a direction, and you work to it. And then I suppose learning, don't stop learning, always learn, because like we said before, like you're talking about emotional intelligence, there's new research comes out, you're going to have to adapt or die. So learn everything you can, keep learning, differential learning, go to different people on the same subject, see what you come up with. But don't let it interfere with what you think yourself, as long as you can justify and back it up. And then adapt in relation to your new learnings. So yeah, believe in yourself at all times, commit to it, just learn whatever you can, whenever you can, and adapt in relation to whatever new information you have, and be passionate about it. Passion would have to underpin it all. Don't be having something or going for a goal because you think it will make you look better to other people, or because it fills a hole from something. Make sure it's something you're really passionate for, and you'll look back and be like, I don't regret any of it, regardless of whether I achieved or succeeded. And then that, I suppose, goes back to how you define your success, right? So that would be my advice.
Wise words. But like, you know, every time we jump on a call, Johnny, I learn something new from yourself. But even by your standards tonight, you know, it's been a terrific chat. And I know it's so many people listening to this podcast on relevant platforms will get so much from it. I mean, it's already, I'm here trying to think of asking you questions, and in response, I'm thinking of, Jesus, I'm falling short here in X, Y, and Z. But it's been absolutely illuminating. I suppose, you know what, like, you're not really that much of a man for the socials, but where's best to keep up today with yourself and the app?
Yeah, it's funny, mate, because I'm very, very social. I just have never been big on personal social media or the other stuff either. Don't rule it out in the future, but if you want to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me at Jonathon, JONATHON, at headcoach.app. So I'm always interested in connecting with other coaches, other people in football, whether it be session design, tactics, the emotional intelligence stuff. And I'm sure hopefully in the future we can get a deeper dive into that at some point, because to be honest, mate, I love your questions and I don't think you fell short at all. It's just when you're passionate about something, we could go on for a few hours, right? So yeah, looking forward to getting on again.
Yeah, that's the idea. Leave leave some energy in you for round two. But yeah, second those words from Johnny. If anybody's interested in reaching out to John to speak about anything about emotional intelligence, the work of the mind when it comes to football, search to site execution models, he's certainly your man. Johnny, listen, one more time, thanks very much for coming on. It's been brilliant.
Pleasure, mate, as always. I'm sure we'll be on again, not so distant future.